It's an industry worth more than $5.5 billion a year in Australia alone, but now in a worldwide first, new rules have been introduced for buy now, pay later companies. The Code of Conduct, drafted by the Australian Finance Industry Association, requires organisations to meet minimum standards in an effort to protect consumers.
Now, companies such as Afterpay, Klarna and Zip will have to agree to the voluntary commitments, including caps on late fees and credit checks. However, some argue the safeguards don't go far enough.
And we welcome back consumer commentator Joe Ucukalo. Hi, Joe. Take us through the basics of the new code and what they mean for the consumer.
Okay, so the new code has been introduced from the 1st of March. What's really important to know is this is a voluntary code. It's not laws, they're guidelines, and they've been written by the industry themselves. So that's where some might say that these laws aren't doing enough to protect consumers.
Yeah, so this comes on the back, Joe, of these recent stats that found 1 in 5 users are late making repayments and some are even skipping meals so they can afford their bills. So how significant are these new rules, do you think, Joe?
Look, in my opinion, the rules don't go far enough. They are guidelines, they're guidelines, not rules. So what that means is, we don't have laws that protect consumers. They're guidelines that these companies say that they'll operate under. And it's important to know that only 8 of the major companies in Australia have signed up for these guidelines. They're not across every single provider you might be able to sign up for.
So exactly what are the guidelines? We haven't...
Yeah, and this is kind of disappointing if you ask me. So these companies are built on sophisticated technology. They're really using, good tools to sell you things and to use your data. When you look at the details of these guidelines, they're very, very basic. They say things like, we will notify you 40 days before we introduce or increase a new fee. They'll say, we won't charge you fees that are unreasonable. They'll be fair, reasonable and capped. So they're really, really basic guidelines. Basically there's not much change if you're borrowing or if you're accessing under $2,000 of money. There's some checks for more than $2,000.
So a bit of a toothless tiger kind of thing. What do you think needs to happen to get this right?
Yeah, so I guess what people need to understand is the government can't introduce laws unless they know that there's a problem. Now, why the government can't do that is they can't be seen to influencing, what types of businesses and how businesses run. So when the government knows that there's problems, then they'll come and introduce laws. But what we're seeing now is guidelines. In my opinion, this is the first step. I think we'll start to see laws being introduced within the next 18 months. And why this is because I think the government's looking at it in terms of a dollar value. How much are people having access to per company? So usually, it's around $2,000. When you compare that with the value of a mortgage, which might be, $500,000 or $1 million, the government could be convinced to say the damage that these services could do to people is far less significant than what, say, the home loan industry could do. But I think the government doesn't understand is how compelling these services are to getting people to buy more, to spend more. I like to refer to these services as feel good now, pay later. So really, it's really compelling. I've used them myself, and what I can say is I feel like my judgment when I went buying was impaired, and it's because the emotional sensations I get when using these services.
Okay. So getting back to what it means for the customer, will the customers now be checked for credit before they're allowed to go through with a transaction?
So this is what these companies have avoided, going through any credit reporting and credit checks. So what the guidelines are saying is that if you want access to more than $2,000, they'll do some checks. But this isn't the same as you'd see borrowing from, existing credit providers.
Okay. So companies can be sort of publicly named and shamed in the event of serious breaches, right? That will affect a lot of companies who trade on their brand and need that brand to stay clean.
Well, we would like to think that, but the New South Wales government publishes, the Fair Trading Department publishes a list of companies who they receive more than 10 complaints in a month. Now we see on this list, we see brands like Qantas, Airbnb, even Bunnings. Now I've never seen any evidence that these companies being published on the New South Wales Fair Trading list have any impact on people buying from these big brands. So I don't expect that this list of buy now, pay later services, I don't think that it'll have much impact at all of people spending money with them.
Okay, if a consumer has some kind of debt with these buy now, pay later firms, does that affect your credit score and credit history?
Yeah, great question, Kylie. Currently, no. And this is what the companies are trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid any checks on how much they can loan to you and how many providers you can sign up for. So something people need to be aware of is I'm seeing new versions of these businesses coming through every week. Yesterday, I saw a business that had 1,000 people sign up in 4 days saying they had no marketing. They're saying we're having extraordinary growth. There's so many new companies trying to sell you this service. It's up to you as the consumer to really think about these new services as being potentially a separate wallet. How many different wallets can you keep track of?
Yeah, extraordinary growth in that sector. Important to know. It looks like it is the way of the future, right? So it's really important we understand it properly. Thank you, Jo. Good to talk to you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jo.
All right.